Good morning, Chodesh Tov. Thanks for joining. Our ripped from the headline session this morning is a headline from October 16th, 1946, the International News Service. And this is a discussion about how Purim was referenced back in October by the infamous and about to be executed Julius Streicher. So this is in the aftermath of the Holocaust, in the aftermath of the Nuremberg trials. This is Kingsbury Smith's account of what was taking place as Julius Streicher was led to the gallows. His hands were tied securely behind his back. Two guards, one on each arm, directed him to number one gallows on the left of the entrance. He walked steadily the 6 feet to the first wooden step, but his face was twitching. As the guard stopped him at the bottom of the steps for the identification formality, he uttered his piercing scream, "Heil Hitler!" The shriek sent a shiver down my back. He was pushed the last 2 steps to the mortal spot beneath the hangman's rope. The rope was being held back against the wooden rail by the hangman. Streicher was swung suddenly to face the witnesses and glared at them. Suddenly, he screamed, "Purimfest 1946. The American officer standing at the scaffold said, "Ask the man if he has any last words." When the interpreter had translated, Streicher shouted, "The Bolsheviks will hang you one day." When the black hood was raised over his head, Streicher's muffled voice could be heard to say, "Adele, my dear wife." At that instant, the trap opened with a loud bang. He went down kicking. So this is the end of Julius Streicher, who, along with a number of other Nazis, was executed in October 1946, but he screamed Purimfest 1946. And this account was covered, you see it covered by the International News Service. It was in Time magazine. His last words were recounted. Most people don't know what Purimfest 1946 means. But of course, Jews recognize the word Purim, as did many others, but what does it have to do with specifically that declaration at that time? So this idea was actually put into a book, a novel called The Code of Esther, which you can look up and you can read if you want. But it has been analyzed in a number of different ways from a Jewish perspective. Source number 2 is an article by Emanuel Bloch, which appeared in the Hakira Journal, volume number 28. Does the book of Esther contain a hidden prophetic allusion to the Nuremberg trial? Might the execution of 10 Nazi high dignitaries curiously echo the hanging of the 10 sons of the villain Haman in Megillat Esther, despite the 24th century separating those 2 events? Such has been the claim repeated for many years in some religious circles. To provide a brief overview at the end of the book of Esther, the queen makes a surprising request that the sons of Haman be hanged tomorrow. They had already been killed in previous fights. So why the strange hanging of enemies already dead? The mystery thickens within another curiosity of the biblical text, letters of the unusual size in the Megillah. 3 smaller, Shin, Tuf, Zion, and a larger one, Vav. What could they mean? All would finally be enlightened by a numerical reading of the unusual letters, small letters referring to the year 707, and the large Vav referring to the 6th millennium. Thus, 5707 since the creation of the world, or 1946, according to the Christian calendar. In other words, the year of the Nuremberg trial. The parallels between Purim's account and Nuremberg's trial seem disturbing. In both cases, the number of executions was the same, 10. In both the cases, the mode of execution was the same, hanging. Moreover, the day of execution, October 16th, 1946, fell on the day of Hoshana Rabbah, identified by the Jewish tradition as a day of judgment. So a lot of spooky coincidences, or not, which led to an analysis, but also led to this kind of narrative that Purimfest 1946 was a reference by Streicher, somehow put into his mouth, or sending a message of the generations that the Purim story continues with the hanging of these 10 Nazis. Originally, it was 12 that were being tried together. One of them was tried in absentia, and one committed suicide. So it's supposed to be 11 hung on that day, but instead it was only 10. Right? And the coincidences keep mounting, and the hints keep coming. Sometimes the hints are seen, like Monday morning quarterbacking. Only afterwards are we able to see them. But Bloch summarizes what has been analyzed in various circles as to the Megillah continues to tell the story, right? Megillat Esther literally translates into revealing that which is hidden. The whole Purim story is a mystery wrapped around an enigma with a riddle inside. And so we continue to see that story play out, and that Megillat Esther is there to tell us the story in the future. So this was the declaration in October 1946. So clearly, this idea of Purimfest 1946 started then, but how has the book of Esther been analyzed and understood as telling other stories, predicting the future in other ways? Also, it's very much, in addition to the number of Nazis hung on that day, a lot of this is based upon these large letters. And if anyone has a Megillah, or you can look inside the scroll of a Megillah, you can probably find images online, you'll see that those 4 letters, the big Vav, and the smaller Tav Shin Zayin, are to be found. And when did that start? Right? In general, we talk about letters and dots in the Torah scroll. We talk about a Masorah. We talk about a tradition. When did this start? Is this something that's authoritative? Is this something that is found in every single Megillah? Is this something that has a history? Did it start in 1946, 1945? What about the letters? Are these the only letters that are meant to be a certain size? Is it the same in every other Megillah? So let's analyze this dramatic occurrence, both from the Jewish textual sources for the Megillah, as well as how Purim has been understood, and whether the anomalous letters have taught any other lessons or brought any other references to events which took place after the Purim story in the spirit of the Purim story in terms of Jewish redemption. So source number 3 is the Gemara in Megillah 16b. The verse says, in Parshat Dasa and the 10 sons of Haman, right? They were hung, and this is fairly dramatic. Anyone here read Megillah? Hirsch is an expert. I think he scheduled, whether he knows it or not, to read it 5 times on Purim. Thanks, Hirsch. If you need help, we'll get back up. But the idea of the 10 sons of Haman being hung is mentioned very dramatically, and it's written out very dramatically. It covers a whole column of the Megillah scroll text. And Rav Ada of Jaffa taught, when reading the Megillah, the names of Haman's 10 sons and the word 10 must be recited in one breath. Right? It's kind of that you hear that in the Megillah, you're kind of wondering, and then afterwards, you get the reader has to catch his breath. Why? Because their souls all departed together. So there's some sort of clumping together of the 10 sons of Haman. Now it's interesting that they're mentioning they all died together, they're being hung, because as Block mentioned in the article, they were already all dead. Right? Just to briefly recount the Purim story, we know that Haman casts lots, decides that everyone is going to be, he's going to he wants to have his nefarious plan on the Jews carried out. Comes out it's going to be in the 13th day of Adar, which is 12 months later. He cast these lots on Pesach. The Megillah says when this took place, when he went, because it tells us when Esther immediately went to pray on behalf of the Jewish people, the 3 days. We can calculate this was taking place 10 months before the date of the event. Now, shortly thereafter, Esther pleads for the people. Achashverosh has Haman hung, but this is still a long time coming before the actualization of Haman's date. What does Achashverosh say? I can't roll back the decree, but I can issue a countering decree, which the Jews will be able to defend themselves on that day that Haman has declared as the war against the Jews, and they'll have the Persian armies backing. And that is what happens on the 13th day of Adar. Plenty of the anti-Semites now learn the lesson, and they stand up to fight against, to kill the Jews, and the Jews fight back, assisted by the Persian authorities. And on the 13th of Adar, they kill their enemies.
And the eldest son, Padashtana, whatever his name is, was supposed to have set up the gallows for Mordechai.
So they all they meet their end, and then what happens is that Esther asks that in Shushan on the 14th day of Adar, the Jews get to fight one more day and hang Haman's sons as a sign of to their enemies that they've been defeated. So it's this is taking place over 11 months. And even though Rav Ada says they all died together, could be, but They're not dying here. Rabbi Yochanan taught the vav of the name of Vaizata must be elongated as a pole, like the steering oar of a ship. Why? Because they were all hanging on one pole. All right, so you have the idea. I've mentioned two things in this teaching. One, the one breath, and we'll come back to it, as reading the 10 sons of Haman in one breath. You also have the fact that there's a vav that's big. Now, okay, that's very good, because we said, as Block recounted, that the Megillah has 4 different size letters, 3 small, 1 large, the one large one. The one large one is a vav. So we have a Talmudic source that means part of the discussion within our Megillot, which have been written since the times of the Talmud, has a tradition of a large vav. Great. What about any other letters? Is there any rabbinic tradition? So if we dig into the Midrash, there's a Midrash called Midrash Otiot de Rabbi Akiva. Right. In general, when we talk about Midrash, we can be talking about a very large body of work. And there's some famous collections of Midrashim. Midrash Rabbah is one that many have heard of or familiar with. There's the Sifra and the Sifri. So there's a collection of Midrash Otiot de Rabbi Akiva, Midrash about letters, which teachings of Rabbi Akiva, and is collected these days in a book called Otzer HaMidrashim. So source number 4, the Zion of the name Vaizata is written small because Haman slandered 7 times the Jewish people. Okay, there's a small Zion. The Resh of the name Parshandata is written small because he was lowered and hung. The Shin and the Taf of Parshandata are written small because if you remove the Pei and the Resh, you'll end up with the word banishment, Shmad. The Shmad, destruction, banishment, however you want, you translate it in that family. So we're taking now that in addition to the Vav mentioned in the Talmud, the Midrash quote mentions that you have the Zion, the Resh, the Shin, and the Taf. So that's very good. So now we have the Vav, and we have the Taf, and the Shin, and the Zion. We also have a Resh that should also be small. So already our 4 letters, there's another letter that seems to be there. How that will impact our understanding of Purimfest 1946, we'll come back to. But at least we're seeing there is some rabbinic tradition of the 4 letters that contribute to this Purimfest narrative being mentioned. But what about the Resh? And so, what happens essentially is that Block in his article that was referenced, and others talk about that there are a whole host of traditions as to the different size letters found in the Megillah. You start with the Talmud, which is the most well-known source of the Vav. You have the Midrash Otiot of Rabbi Akiva, which includes 4 others. He says there are 6 other traditions found in history. The most between the time of the Midrashim and the 14th century. And in the Orchot Chaim, which came in the 14th century, has in source number 5, Keshakosvin b'Megillah, Kosvin osa b'Maleh, Maleh v'chaser chaser, v'lo dvukot tzvichasirtut. Our Megillos have to be written similar to Torah scrolls and following some of the same rules of the scribal writing. Chamesh meos b'sof hadaf. You should have the words 500 of the 500 people in Persia who were killed at the end of a column. V'ish b'rosh hadaf, and you should have the word ish on the top. Ve'elu osios hagdolos v'akatanos. Some letters are large and some are small. The ches of Chor Karpas is big. Vav Devaizata is big. The Taf Rishona of Atichtov is big. The Zion of Vaizata is small. The Taf of Parshandata is small. The Shin of Parmasha is small. So you have here those that are referenced by the Gemara, as well as the Midrash Otiot of Rabbi Akiva, as well as another one. Right, you have the first Taf of Atichtov. So you at least have included in a rabbinic source that's contributing to the legalities of the Megillah our 4 letters of the Purimfest story, as well as another one. You have to read it in one breath. The 10 sons of Haman, including the words Aseret, also have to be included. And so we're beginning to see as the way our tradition comes about, both in terms of the letters, although there's other letters that are referenced being large and small, and how it's being read. So we have, by the 14th century, they're writing Megillas that will have something in common with our story here, the idea of the Purimfest 1946. Now, one of the things that that block mentioned is that idea that the large Vav, stands for the 6th millennium. Now, it could, but if it also had a hey, it could stand for the 6th millennium, because when we talk about the year, when we talk about the Jewish year now, we talked about 5786, right? The Tav Shin Vav are, when we talk about the 5786, we call it Tav Shin Pei Vav. Tav Shin Pei Vav is 786. We always leave out which millennium it is. And so we call it, so why does Vav have to be the 6th millennium? Why can't Hay talk about the 6th millennium? Because 5706 would also be 5707 would also be 1946. The expression we could use for something like this is it's not glot. It's like when they talk about gematria. When you talk about the numerical value of things, it can be off by 1. Does the word have a yud or not have a yud? My favorite gematria story is about how the Rebbe told his Hasidim that the word kugel has the same numerical value, same gematria as oneg Shabbos, to delight on Shabbos. And very clearly, no matter how you spell kugel with Hebrew letters, whether you spell it just kuf, vav, gimel, lamed, or kugel really is from, as we mentioned before, kuf, ayin, yud, gimel, vav, lamed, igul, because the traditional kugels are round, right? Square kugels really don't cover it. But the Chassid said to the Rebbe, the gematria of kugel is a lot less than oneg Shabbos. And the Rebbe said, so eat more kugel. Right? Sometimes the numbers can get us, teach us in different ways. But we seem to have, and this is how our Megillas are written, that we have these numbers. And Rabbi Eliezer Melamed, contemporary author and scholar, in his Pinine Halacha, summarizing the laws of Megillah, mentions this. Source 6, the letter Vav in the name Vaisata is written higher than the other letters to teach that Haman's sons were all hanged together, right? He quotes the Megillah. This is also mentioned in Shulchan Aruch. And then he goes on to expound that the point is that the foundation of Israel's faith is the existence of one God. The Amalekites oppose this belief and hate the Jews. Thus, when they are eliminated, God's oneness is revealed to the world. Therefore, when Haman's sons were punished, they died as one, since their death confirmed our belief in God's oneness. You see, he has a spiritual lesson being built into the rabbinic teaching of the large letter. And I think it's going to be a very good springboard, the fact that from Megillat Esther, which is a book about revealing that which is hidden, we see a quest for finding certain spiritual messages of faith from the Megillah that may or may not be there. The Vav has a strong tradition. So if the rabbi said there's a big Vav, what tradition are we going to find there? So Rabbi Melamed says we're going to find a message of faith. He quotes the Maharal. Maybe that didn't stop just with the Maharal. And we go further along the story of Jewish history in contemporary times, we find other lessons that can be found, and we'll see how that played out in more recent times following the Holocaust. Let me just stop if there are any questions, comments, or clarifications needed. Okay, so we mentioned that the Streicher Purimfest 1946 was covered by the media. It was out there. How did Jews respond? What was the religious response? Did any rabbis sermonize about it? Did any rabbis comment on it? Did any rabbis make connections to it? Right? How do we get here? We know that the Megillah has different size letters. That's something that wasn't just relating to post-Holocaust. It was something that the Maharal was noting that there's spiritual messages. So what about after Streicher is hung, what were some of the reactions? So there is a book in Hebrew called Ish Hamudot. It is the biography of Rabbi Michael Ber Weissmandel, who was a Rav in Hungary, and he survived the Holocaust. He came to the United States and established the Nitra Yeshiva in Mount Kisco, New York. And he was very involved in during the war in terms of trying to save Jews, and he was able to escape from a cattle car that was headed towards Auschwitz in 1944, and eventually came to America. And I would say he's not as well known in our modern Orthodox circles. He was not a Zionist, but he was very much his writings and some of his sentiments very much are studied because he was one of the rabbis who survived the Shoah, came out afterwards, and would speak about it. So in his biography, in source number 7, you have a passage which we'll read and translate. So he quotes from a Rabbi Alexander Nyman that Rabbi Weissmandl said, Amar lo remez al ma shenerga asara Germanian poshe milchama b'shnas tafshin zayin. That we find an allusion to the Nazis who were hung in 1946. And he then quotes Rabbi Weissmandl's talk on the subject. Rabbi Zelishono. Isa b'Sheris Yisrael. He says that there's a work called Sheris Yisrael, which is considered from the book, the teachings or the writings of Josephus. Right? We know that Josephus Flavius was a Jewish general who surrendered and became a chronicler of what was taking place with the Roman conquest of Judea in the Second Temple destruction and its aftermath. So, the War of the Jews, Contra Appian, there's a series of writings that gives us some, original source material, whether it's accurate or not. Historians have lots to say about it. He was writing to make the Romans look good, Jews bad. Again, it is recognized, though, as a piece that came out contemporaneously with the events that were taking place. There's really very little reference to him in any rabbinic or midrashic literature. They probably were not very happy with him, Josephus. But this idea of Yosiphon, there seems to have been kind of a, like a rabbinic version of Josephus. That the kind of that way, maybe it's like the art scrollization. They took Josephus and they took some of it that measured up, that aligned with some of the rabbinic teachings, and that's what Rabbi Weissmandl is quoting, because he's saying that in this Sheris Yisrael Josephus teachings. Xeras Haman me'olam lo nisbatel legamri. That Haman's decrees never really were fully annulled. El shonischalfa b'xeras tach v'tat. And so we see this extending into the Khmelnytsky pogroms and massacres of 1648 and 1649. And again, he starts by saying, Josephus tells the story of the Jewish people, tells the story of Purim, the Purim story launches anti-Semitism, and then we can see that it's anti-Semitism extending throughout the generations, says Rabbi Weissmandl. That Haman's was defeated in the Purim story, but it was reignited again in 1648, and therefore Osios Taf Chen Nirmazim B'Megilas Osios Gedolos. We see that there's a large Taf in Vatichtov, Esther Amalka, and a large ches in Chur Karpas, Hashem Yinkom Nichmas B'nei Yisrael. So there's a teaching that, we saw that the Orchos Chaim in source number 5 mentioned these as two of the larger letters. So Taf and Ches, year 1648, we see Haman reappearing then. And we see that there are 3 large letters and 3 small letters. We've already had the Tuf and the Ches analyzed by those who understand the secrets of our tradition. So that means there was another large letter and 3 smaller letters that require explanation. So how can we explain it? There were 10 Nazis who were hung. And it's well known. It was written in newspapers at the time. Julius Streicher, when they took Julius Streicher to be hung, Hifsir Bilshono Hatam Hatame Begermania, Heinz Hoben, the Juden there in Soviet Purim, 1946. Hayom Yesh Lehudim HaPurim Hasheni Shelahem. Maduras Tavshin Zayin. He says this is the Jews' second Purim. Now that wasn't exactly the quote, but that's how it was filtered through Rabbi Weissmandel's analysis, or that's how he filtered through the news, that he was basically saying there's a second Purim of 1946. When you look at those remaining letters, there's a large vav, as we said. This is to the sixth millennia. Umasinu tav zira b'shmoshel parshandasa, shimin zira b'shmoshel parshandasa, zayin zira b'shmoshel vaisasa. And there's a smaller tav shin and zayin. V'imosios tav shin zayin. Nimtzeh shebehektem remez anal ashnas tafes asher al yodin diskala shamaros shahaldoros harchonim amen remazim and Megillah. In addition to the large tav and the large ches, which shall indicate that what the destructions of 1648 were alluded to in the Megillah. Niskala shel hamaor shel doros hachronim amen remazim Megillah yotzei lanu efu shebishmosu shel aseres b'nei Haman sofun tamun od remes. There's another hidden allusion. Asher b'shnas tavshin zayin lavshi yer shuv asher yilo asar tzorei haYehudim ad kan divrei harav hagon Rav Michal Dov v'hu hapela upela. This is the remarkable analysis of Rabbi Weissmandel that we can also find allusion to Streicher's words in the Megillah. And he, within Yish Chamudot, Rabbi Weissmandel had a conversation with someone who suggested other allusions, and he said, no, this made a lot of sense, which makes a lot of sense for Rabbi Weissmandel to see the continuation of the attacks against the Jews being channeled through the Purim story, as well as salvation. He was saved from that destruction. So, so you have the letters. You have the letters which are, according to traditional rabbinic sources, are of different sizes. You have seen that there's a spiritual effort, a philosophical, Jewish machshava or Kabbalistic effort to find allusions to other events. And even when Rabbi Melamed, codifies this, he says it's there to give us allusions and hints and to take us to other events in history. And you have Rabbi Weissmandel, who seems to be one of the contemporary rabbis of that time, contemporaneous rabbis, who's seeing the Streicher Purimfest 1946 as an indication of the Megillah story continuing to tell the Jewish story of destruction and salvation through the Shoah. Now, what about Purim and Nazi thinking? Why would he be thinking Purimfest? Now, you could say, God put the words in his mouth, but what's the connection between the Nazis and Purim? And it seems that the Nazis knew about Purim. Purim was in their understanding of the Jewish people. Source number 8, Jeff Jacoby, who has written about this, Jeff Jacoby in the Boston Globe. Streicher knew all this. Applied yourself, his country estate, he had a collection of books about Purim in which he underlined and read the references to Haman and his fate. 1934, Der Stürmer, which he published a lengthy article on Purim, headlined The Night of Murder, the secret of the Jewish holiday of Purim is unveiled. Fitting that Streicher went to his death, uppermost in his mind was the parallel between the hanging of Haman's 10 evil sons and the hanging of Hitler's 10 Nazi accomplices. His outburst Purimfest 1946 may have mystified those who were present, but it wasn't meaningless. So, and Bloch goes on to say, go a deeper dive into the Nazis and their Purim understanding. The festival of Purim appeared regularly in Nazi propaganda. November 10th, 1938, the day after terrorizing events in Kristallnacht, Streicher gave a speech to more than 100,000 people assembled to listen to him in Nuremberg. He justified the violence against the Jews, saying that Jews murdered 75,000 Persians in one night, and the Germans would have the same fate if the Jews had been able to accomplish their plan to institute a murderous Purim in Germany. In 1940, the best-known Nazi anti-Jewish propaganda film, Der Ewige Jude, took up the same theme. The whole movie can be viewed. You can link to it in the article, with Purim appearing from minute 45. In 1942, on Purim Day, the Nazis hanged 10 Jews in the small Polish town of Dunskowola in order to avenge the murder of Haman's 10 sons. Another incident a year later, during Purim 1943, the Nazis executed 10 Jews from the Piotrowka ghetto. Similar incidents also occurred in Cheshire, Radom, Slitovich. Adolf Hitler himself, in his speech on January 30th, 1944, declared that if Nazis were defeated by the Allied forces, the Jews would celebrate a second Purim. So Purim and the Nazis, we understand it. Amalek, Haman, Hitler, Nazis, yes, they knew that too. And they saw themselves expressed through the Purim story and used the Purim story as part of their propaganda. And so I think that when we talk about nowadays, in terms of, with the fact that, Purim, I would say, appearing in the world events today, it's very hard to ignore the whole Iran, right? Persia, it is Iran. And so this is an article from June. It could be a headline that we see today. Who knows? The talks are continuing. Will there be a strike? What will happen? Source number 10, 2,500 years in the making. Are the Jews once again turning the tables on Iran? We hope so. Thursday, June 19, 2025 marks the anniversary of the day when traditionally Jewish people turned the tables of their enemies in the story of Purim. As the stories recount in the book of Esther, on this day in the Hebrew calendar, 23rd of June, 23rd day of the month of Sivan, King Achashverosh, ruler of the Persian Empire, accepted the plea of his Jewish wife, Queen Esther, to allow the people to defend themselves. So this was a stark reversal of the decree signed with the king's seal by Vizier Haman, which would have seen all the Jews of Persia slaughtered by their foes on the fateful day during the month of Adar. Right? We said before, the decree was not annulled. There was just a counter decree that was issued, and it was issued on 23 Sivan. That's the date listed in the Megillah. It is in Iran that, according to some, a similar turnabout is taking place, as Israeli journalist Amit Segal mentioned on Wednesday. This is in June 2025. Tomorrow is the 23rd day of the month of Sivan in the Hebrew calendar, and it's worth noting giving Israel's war with Iran. Why? I'll explain. According to the Purim story, Haman convinced King Achashverosh to sign off on the decree to destroy the Jews. But as tradition goes, on the 23rd of Sivan, at Achashverosh's instruction, the Jewish Queen Esther Mordechai drafted a royal decree giving Jews under the king's rule permission to rise up and kill those who had allied with Haman to kill them. And they did just that, saving themselves from annihilation. Where did this take place? Persia. Coincidence? I'll let you decide. So here we have the 23rd of Sivan of this past year being a day that the modern day Persia, Iran, is being attacked. The tables are turning. That also is coming to us from the Purim story. We know that date, 23 Sivan, as a day of the tables turning. That exactly was when the war, the 12-day war, Am Kalavi, was taking place just a few months ago. And there's a certain inspiration that is drawn from the book of Esther to contemporary times, depending on when contemporary is or was. We see 1648, we see 1946, we see 23 Sivan 2025. As Gila Ross wrote a few years ago, source number 11, let's put ourselves in the mindset of Jews in 1946. We're thinking about what's going through Rav Weissmandel when he's taking in the news of Streicher's hanging and his declaration of Purimfest 1946. The Jews had just been decimated. It was possibly the worst thing that's ever happened in Jewish history. The morale of Jewish people was very low. In the instance of the hanging at Nuremberg trials, you could say that God gave them a glimmer of hope. Even the Nazi being hung shouted Purimfest. If he could see the clear connection to another time in our history when our enemies wanted to destroy us, but we prevailed, surely we can see the connection as well. Even in the darkest of times, God showed us a little bit of light. We don't know why it had to be the most terrible time. What we do know is that there's always a plan that God is orchestrating and that God has our back. There's this idea from the Purim story, again, Megillat Esther. We're trying to not only reveal that story, but we continuously, from that time on, throughout Jewish history, are trying to see God's role, our role, and find meaning in the events that connect us to our story. And just wanted to conclude a humorous story that Block quotes, that Adolf Hitler once went to consult a clairvoyant who would predict his future. You will die in a Jewish holiday, the clairvoyant told him. Which? Asked the dictator. No matter, retorted the seer. Any day you die will be a holiday for the Jews. But Purim is an extraordinary celebration which we celebrate life, humor, children, the ultimate victory of good over evil. So no, there's absolutely no relationship between Haman's sons and the Nazis convicted during the Nuremberg trial. The divine presence remains hidden behind the double screen of nature and history. But in the end, is it not precisely in this sober observation, in the form of Jewish humor, that despite our frequent inability to perceive the transcendent reaffirms life, that the true spirit of Purim resides? Really, that's what Purim is all about, trying to find that where we see God, where God sees us, and to arrive at a time when we can say and declare loudly, light and celebration, that's how it should be for us as well.
Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you so
What
much.
was very disturbing, though, was when the actual Nuremberg Raw trials did come out. The United States was worried about their renewed relationship with Germany, and they boycotted the actual, events in film, the real raw film. And we like to be the diplomats.
Look, look, this is a snapshot, of that period, in particular, I called it 60 years later. Actually, the Purimfest will be 60 years, come October. But just the way that, people have analyzed the Book of Esther for hints, allusions, meaning, that's where it's the perfect example of our seeking God, in contemporary times. We're not doing it necessarily to be prescriptive, but we're certainly looking for a description of how we can see God, and also how we see our role in this.
Right.
So is the Purimfest 1946.
Yes, and